Tonight, on History's Greatest Mysteries, he was an action hero, a cultural icon, a martial arts legend on the cusp of superstardom.
You need to prove to the world what you can do better than the other. So that means you need to fight yourself, physically and mentally. You need to prove for yourself you can do something different.
Something unimaginable just happened. Jet Li, the silent warrior, the man who never speaks out unless it truly matters, has finally broken his silence. And the subject? Bruce Lee. For decades, people wondered what Jet Li truly thought about the man who transformed martial arts cinema.
A cultural icon, a martial arts legend,
Redefined Asian masculinity and changed Hollywood forever. Rumors swirled, interviews dodged, but now Jet Li has spoken. And what he revealed isn't just a tribute, it's a confession, a reflection, and a passing of the torch from one master to another. This isn't about fame, it's about legacy, pain, struggle, and the truth behind martial arts legends we thought we knew. The shadow of a giant. When Jet Li was a child growing up in Beijing, Bruce Lee had already become a global sensation. Even though Bruce's films were banned in China during the Cultural Revolution, whispers of the man who made the West bow to Kung Fu had already reached the alleys and training halls of Beijing. Young Jet Li never saw Bruce Lee in theaters. He didn't need to. His name alone was enough to inspire awe. He was a myth to us, Jet Li recalls. A warrior from another world. At the time, Jet Li was just a disciplined wushu prodigy.
The Chinese Kung Fu is much more well-known as wushu or martial art in China.
He was training for national competitions, not movie screens. But every time he stepped onto the mat, the image of Bruce Lee, strong, defiant, fearless, floated somewhere in the back of his mind. Bruce Lee wasn't just a martial artist. He was rebellion. He was confidence. He was everything China couldn't be at the time. And for Jet Li, who lived in a tightly controlled world of state-run sports and rehearsed perfection, Bruce Lee represented danger, freedom, and art. Years later, when Jet Li made it big in Hong Kong and then Hollywood, everyone wanted him to be the next Bruce Lee. They wanted him to fight like Bruce, talk like Bruce, even scowl like Bruce. But Jet Li knew something fans didn't. You can't replace Bruce Lee, he said. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a mind. Hollywood's hunger for another dragon. In the 1990s, when Jet Li began landing roles in American films, producers had one thing in mind: reviving the energy Bruce Lee once brought to the screen. From Enter the Dragon to Fist of Fury,
Warner Brothers presents Enter the Dragon, where the world's greatest martial arts athletes meet the ultimate challenge.
Bruce had not just stunned the world, he had changed cinema forever. Hollywood wanted that magic again, and they looked to Jet Li to deliver it. But Jet Li never saw himself as Bruce Lee's shadow. He respected the legend deeply, but he never tried to mimic him, and that was the first truth he revealed in his long-awaited tribute. People always asked me, "Are you the next Bruce Lee?" And I always said, "No, there is no next Bruce Lee, there is only one." Instead, Jet Li chose silence. He let his performances speak. Films like Hero, Fearless, and Once Upon a Time in China showed a different kind of warrior, more internal, more graceful, more layered. Still, he knew he was walking on a path Bruce had carved. He acknowledged it without pride or pressure. He simply walked with humility. But Hollywood wouldn't let the comparison go. "You know what hurt the most?" Jet Li said. "They wanted me to be Bruce Lee, but they didn't want to understand Bruce Lee." That sentence hit hard, because for Jet Li, Bruce Lee wasn't just a screen icon. He was a thinker, a philosopher, a revolutionary trapped in a fighter's body. And that side of Bruce, the one few truly saw, is the one Jet Li loved the most. When Jet Li met Bruce Lee through film. Jet Li never met Bruce Lee in person. Bruce died in 1973.
Lee died in 1973 from an allergic reaction to painkillers.
Jet was just 10 years old. but he met him through the screen, and those meetings changed everything. I watched The Way of the Dragon when I was still a teenager, Jet Li said. I remember sitting in a dark room watching him fight Chuck Norris, and I thought, that's not acting, that's truth. Unlike choreographed wushu routines, Bruce Lee fought with raw emotion. Every punch was defiance. Every scream was resistance. He wasn't performing. He was proving something. That energy, Jet Li says, is what separates Bruce Lee from everyone else. It wasn't about the kicks. It was about why he kicked. Jet Li studied Bruce's movements, but he paid more attention to his eyes. Bruce fought like he was on fire inside, he said. That fire, I didn't have that. I had peace, but I admired his fire. That honest admission stunned many fans. Jet Li wasn't trying to outshine Bruce. He was trying to understand him, and for a young boy growing up in a restrictive world, Bruce's fire became a beacon. Jet Li says, he gave people like me permission to dream, to believe we could break out of the system. The philosopher behind the fist. In martial arts circles, Bruce Lee is often remembered for his blazing speed and deadly technique. But Jet Li insists that's the least important part. He was a warrior of the mind first, Jet said. Jet Li had spent years studying Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucian teachings. He wasn't just a martial artist. He was a thinker too. And that's why Bruce's philosophy hit him harder than his fists ever could. When Bruce Lee said, "Be water, my friend," he wasn't being poetic. He was preaching freedom.
Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Bruce was the first Chinese man to tell the West, "I don't need your approval. I know who I am." That courage, that voice, was his real weapon, Jet explained. Jet Li confessed he once spent days reading Bruce's personal writings, notes, letters, philosophies. What he discovered moved him deeply. Bruce was always in a war, not with people, but with limitation. He refused to be boxed in, by race, by style, by fear. For Jet Li, who had always followed structure and tradition, this was revolutionary. Bruce was not just fighting opponents, he was fighting systems, and in Jet Li's eyes, that's what made him immortal. Jet Li's personal struggles and Bruce's influence. Though Jet Li appeared calm and graceful on screen, his personal life was often stormy. He suffered injuries, career pressure, political challenges, and a deep spiritual crisis that made him question everything. In those quiet, painful moments, it was Bruce Lee's words that kept him centered. Jet once said, "There were days I couldn't move. My spine was injured, my heart had problems. I even faced death. But Bruce's voice, his belief in inner strength, it stayed with me." He recalled how Bruce once wrote, "The successful warrior is the average man, with laser-like focus." Jet repeated that line to himself while lying in hospital beds, unsure if he'd ever act again. Bruce reminded me that strength isn't about the body, it's about the decision to keep going. And that, Jet Li explained, is why Bruce Lee mattered. Not because he could fight 10 men, but because he showed the world how to fight doubt, racism, pain, and fear. For Jet, Bruce was a silent mentor, a guide he never met, but always followed. And now, as Jet faces aging, health issues, and a quieter life away from the spotlight, he says he finally understands what Bruce was trying to teach all along. The trap of fame, and how Bruce paid the price. Jet Li also spoke about the darker side of Bruce Lee's life, the part few people want to talk about. Bruce wasn't just loved, he was pressured, expected, surrounded by noise, Jet said. He was a prisoner of his own fame. Jet Li, too, faced that cage. At the peak of his career, he couldn't walk through a street in Asia or America without being mobbed. He was expected to be flawless, unbeatable, untouchable.
You need to fight with them. Overcome. Every day, you need to work, continue, to show your strength and do your best.
Fame is a storm, he explained. It lifts you high, but can also break your wings. He believes Bruce paid the price for being too bold, too fast, too real for his time. He wasn't allowed to rest. The world wanted more of him, every second. And when your mind and body are constantly under siege, something breaks. Bruce Lee died at just 32. Officially, it was cerebral edema. But Jet Li believes it was more than that. I think the world took too much from him, and he gave too much. In contrast, Jet chose early on to withdraw from fame before it consumed him. He became a philanthropist, a spiritual seeker, a teacher, and that decision, though difficult, was partly inspired by Bruce. Bruce showed me what could happen if you don't find peace, Jet said. The loneliness of legends. Both Bruce Lee and Jet Li stood alone in their time. Bruce was the first Asian actor to break through Hollywood barriers. Jet Li was the first martial artist from mainland China to become a global box office draw. But success, Jet says, is a lonely place. Bruce broke down walls, but he walked alone. Not everyone understood him. He was ahead of his time. Jet Li admitted that he often wondered if Bruce was happy, not famous or respected, but truly happy. And the answer, he believes, is complicated. Yes, he had joy, he had passion, but I think he also carried pain. Bruce had to fight producers, racism, industry sabotage, even martial arts politics. Jet faced similar struggles, especially when moving from Chinese cinema to Hollywood. There's always a cost when you're the first, Jet said. His deepest admiration for Bruce didn't come from his punches, but from his patience. Bruce didn't explode in anger when rejected by studios. He trained harder. He didn't shout when mocked. He let his art speak. That kind of restraint, that quiet strength, is what made Bruce a giant in Jet Li's eyes. Bruce Lee's hidden message. Jet Li believes the world misunderstood Bruce Lee. Everyone remembers his screams, his abs, his speed, but they forgot his silence. He talked about Bruce's quieter moments, his handwritten letters, his poetry, his refusal to fit into Hollywood stereotypes. He wasn't trying to entertain, Jet said. He was trying to awaken. According to Jet Li, Bruce Lee's films weren't about fighting. They were about freedom. Watch Fist of Fury again, he said. It's not about revenge. It's about dignity, about a Chinese man standing tall in a world that told him to kneel. That, Jet says, is why Bruce remains so relevant. In every country, in every culture, people feel invisible. Bruce told them, "You are enough. Stand up. Fight back." That message is what made Jet Li dedicate his own film career to characters rooted in honor, humility, and purpose. I didn't want to play cool guys. I wanted to play good men. That's what Bruce taught me. And with that, Jet made something very clear. His entire cinematic journey was a quiet echo of Bruce's louder roar. Jet Li's career, a different path, same purpose. While Bruce Lee blazed like lightning, Jet Li moved like flowing water. His characters didn't scream. They bowed, they prayed, they sacrificed. Bruce fought the world. I tried to heal it, Jet explained.
The people, why we need to fight? Because we want to stop.
Drawing a clear distinction in their styles. But despite the difference, Jet insisted their purpose was the same. Bruce broke down the door. I helped people walk through it. Jet Li's roles in Hero, Fearless, and Shaolin Temple weren't rebels. They were men of principle. And yet, everything they stood for traced back to Bruce Lee's core message. Even when I played a monk or a warrior who avoided violence, Jet said, I was still carrying Bruce's message. Control your destiny. Bruce gave Jet permission to be proud of who he was, to speak less and do more, to stand tall without shouting. I wasn't trying to be Bruce Lee's copy, he said. I was trying to be his continuation. That one sentence, simple and profound, defined Jet Li's philosophy. He wasn't replacing Bruce. He was honoring him by walking a different road while carrying the same torch. The dragon's legacy, still burning. Jet Li believes Bruce Lee's true legacy has nothing to do with movies or martial arts. It's courage, he said softly. Courage to speak, courage to break rules, courage to be yourself, even when the world laughs. Jet explained that today's generation of martial artists, MMA fighters, actors, stunt performers, all walk in Bruce's footsteps, whether they know it or not. They're all chasing what Bruce started. He spoke of how Bruce Lee's influence reached places Bruce himself never visited: Africa, South America, the Middle East. In places where people felt weak, Bruce made them feel strong, Jet said, and that to him is true power. Not the power to defeat enemies, but the power to change hearts. That's why Jet refuses to let Bruce's memory be reduced to just memes or fight scenes. He was a warrior of the soul, and that's why Jet Li finally chose to speak out, because he believes the world is starting to forget Bruce, not in name, but in spirit. And Jet couldn't let that happen, not after everything Bruce had given him. What Jet Li wishes he could tell Bruce Lee. Jet Li paused for a long time during the interview when asked what he would say to Bruce Lee if he ever had the chance. His eyes softened, his voice lowered. Then he said something that stunned everyone. "I wouldn't say anything, I'd just bow." That single sentence carried decades of emotion, respect, gratitude, humility. Jet Li admitted that for years he had imagined what it would be like to meet Bruce Lee, not on a movie set, not as celebrities, but as two students of martial arts, sitting on the floor in silence, trading philosophy over tea. "I wouldn't ask him about fighting," Jet said. "I'd ask him how he stayed true to himself in a world that tried to change him." That question, Jet admitted, haunted him for most of his career. There were times when producers wanted him to act tougher, smile bigger, speak more loudly. But in the back of his mind, Bruce's quiet strength was always present. He reminded me that power doesn't shout, it just is.
I have seen all the movies, the actor is great.
And even now, years after Bruce's passing, Jet Li says he still feels his presence, not as a ghost, but as a guide. "He's still teaching me," Jet said, even in silence. When the student becomes the teacher. Jet Li has spent much of his later life teaching others, young martial artists, actors, even monks. But he never calls himself a master. He says that word belongs to people like Bruce. Still, he knows that young people now look at him the way he once looked at Bruce Lee. And that responsibility, he says, is heavy. "I see their eyes. They want to know how to fight, how to move. But I try to teach them how to be." Jet explains that martial arts is not about combat, it's about control of the body, of the mind, of the ego, and that's exactly what Bruce believed too. If your fists are strong but your heart is weak, you're not a warrior, Jet says. He often tells students to study Bruce Lee's writings before watching his films, because the power was in the thinking, not just the punching. Jet now uses his global platform to share not just martial arts, but compassion, discipline, and peace. He travels to orphanages, speaks at schools, funds charities, carrying Bruce Lee's torch into places the dragon never got to reach. The best way to honor your teacher, Jet says, is not to imitate him, but to live his values in your own way. And that's exactly what Jet Li is doing. A legacy bigger than the screen. There was a time when Bruce Lee's image was printed on posters, t-shirts, lunchboxes. He was everywhere. But Jet Li worries that sometimes the real Bruce gets lost in the merchandise. He was not a brand, Jet said. He was a man, a father, a thinker, a human being. Jet believes that in a world obsessed with celebrity, we sometimes forget the human cost of greatness. Bruce gave everything, his body, his soul, his sanity. He fought more than enemies. He fought systems, stereotypes, even his own body. Jet Li knows that path too well, and that's why he's trying to shift the conversation, away from glory and toward meaning. We need to teach the next generation that being strong means being kind, that being famous is not the same as being good. Jet wants Bruce's legacy to go beyond film festivals and martial arts halls. He wants schools to teach Bruce's philosophies. He wants young people to see him not just as a fighter, but as a force for justice, self-respect, and unity. If we only remember his punches, we've missed his point, Jet said. Bruce didn't fight to win, he fought to awaken. And now Jet Li is making sure that awakening never stops. Jet Li revealed that Bruce Lee wasn't just a martial artist he admired. He was a cultural compass. In a world that often told Asian men to be silent, obedient, or invisible, Bruce Lee stood tall, loud, and unapologetically proud of who he was. That, Jet said, gave him, and millions of others, the courage to believe they could be more than just side characters in someone else's story. Bruce wasn't just a fighter in movies. He was a warrior in real life, punching through the limits society placed on him. And through that, he gave birth to something far greater than cinema. He gave birth to representation. Jet also shared how, as a young martial artist, he once felt pressure to emulate Bruce Lee's ferocity. Producers wanted him to snarl like Bruce, scream like Bruce, fight like Bruce. But deep down, Jet knew that true tribute doesn't come from imitation. It comes from evolution. Bruce kicked open the door, Jet said. I just tried to walk through it with respect. And that humility is what separates Jet Li from many others who came after. He never tried to replace the legend. Instead, he became a reflection of Bruce's deeper message, grace, restraint, and meaning behind every move. In his tribute, Jet also made a powerful observation. He said the most remarkable thing about Bruce Lee wasn't his speed or strength, it was his clarity. A man who knew exactly who he was, even when the world misunderstood him. That clarity, Jet admitted, is something he still strives for to this day. Because in a noisy world full of distractions, Bruce Lee's stillness, his ability to speak truth without apology, remains his greatest weapon. And that's what Jet wants today's generation to learn, that real power is knowing yourself and standing by it. As the world replays Bruce Lee's iconic scenes, nunchucks blazing, fists flying, Jet Li reminds us to look beyond the action, to see the thinker, the teacher, the bridge between East and West. Through Jet's words, Bruce Lee's legacy isn't just remembered, it's reawakened. Because when one legend honors another, it doesn't close a chapter, it adds a new one. And through Jet Li's voice, Bruce Lee's story continues, not in silence, but in strength. Jet Li didn't cry during the interview, but his silence at the end spoke louder than any words. When asked if he sees Bruce Lee as a hero, a rival, or a symbol, Jet took a long breath and simply said, "He's a mirror." A mirror, he explained, that forced the world to look at itself, its prejudices, its fears, its limits, and a mirror that inspired men like Jet to believe they could break free from all of it. Bruce showed us what one man could do if he believed in something bigger than himself, Jet said. That's not just martial arts, that's not even cinema, that's legacy. In a world filled with noise, Bruce Lee was lightning in a storm. Jet Li was the calm that followed. Together, their stories aren't separate, they're chapters of the same book, a book about power, pain, purpose, and peace. Jet Li finally spoke, not to steal Bruce Lee's spotlight, but to make sure the light stays on, not just for fans, but for a world that still needs heroes who fight not with hate, but with honor. And in that quiet, powerful tribute, Jet Li reminded us that legends never die. They just pass the torch. Jet Li didn't speak out to seek attention or to stir debate. He spoke because silence was no longer enough. In honoring Bruce Lee, he reminded us that true legacy isn't measured by fame, but by the lives it quietly transforms. Bruce Lee broke barriers. Jet Li carried the torch with grace. Two warriors from different times, one lightning, the other water, both reshaping how the world sees strength, purpose, and identity. And now, With Jet's tribute echoing across generations, one thing is certain: Bruce Lee's spirit never faded. It simply found a new voice.